Just say,
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. Very excited to have you all joining today. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet. I'm a co-founder of a company called This.media, and excited host. I'll be hosting this podcast with Ben Lesh, who you can see right here, who has this beautiful, is it sunblock, Ben?
No. I have yogurt on my nose.
Yes.
I'm taking it off
I
now.
wish I could take like a good pun for having yogurt on your nose, but
everyone, she wanted me to stop eating, so I rubbed yogurt on my nose.
Well, you can follow Ben at Ben Lesh on Twitter for all the fun games and jokes. Ben is the on the core team and author of RxJS 5 and Up, also an engineer at Google. We also have the lovely Jake Archibald, who is joining us. He is on the Chrome developer relations team, and it's Jaffa the cake or Jaffa the cake?
Jaffa the cake, I'd say. Jaffa. Also, I don't have yogurt on my face. I am just naturally this white.
You can follow him on Twitter there. And then we also have Jay Phelps joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at _Jay Phelps. And Jay is actually just recently joined us as co-founder for this.lab. So excited to have you. I think today we're going to talk about different proposals, whether they're WHATWG or TC39. All of these guys have had some pretty interesting, I think, things to say about what's happening. So Ben, you're co-hosting this with me, so I don't know if you want to start off with something. I know you'll probably
Sure. Speaking of proposals, there was another type of proposal recently, I think.
Yeah, I got engaged. Woo!
Very nice. Very nice.
Well done, Elliot. Well done.
I thought for a moment there that this was going to be a live proposal. So it's already been done. It's already been done. Pre-planned. Okay.
Jake, will you marry me?
Yes. No, we work at the same company. It's conflict of interest.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But he had the Git. So I just discovered that. I was like, oh, you put the Git commit on you engraved it because we're committed. And I was like, oh my God, let's get committed. Yes.
It says Git commit on your ring, really?
No, it's the hash. It's the shorthand hash.
Okay, gotcha.
Of our first commit together.
Oh,
nice. That's cute.
Anyways, more exciting. What?
I was just gonna say, what happens if you rebase or something, rewrite history?
Oh no. Gone.
The SHA changes.
So Ben, do you want to start off with talking about the brand newest one, the EventTarget observable proposal on WHATWG?
It is the brand newest. All right, so it's my proposal, first of all. Not mine totally, but I'm the one that put the issue up. So there's a proposal to add observables to the DOM, and the idea is that EventTarget, which we've had for years and years and years, which is this API that everyone's seen before that says add event listener, remove event listener, and there's also a dispatch event, which people use to get DOM events for things like mouse movements and button clicks and all of these other things. It's not the best API because you end up having to hold on to a function in order to remove it later in cleanup. So the proposal is to add observables such that any event target would have an on method where you could say on, and then you'd pass some string identifier like click or mouse move or something like that, and you get an observable, very much shaped similarly to the RxJS observable of those DOM events, such that you could unsubscribe from that and then not have to hold on to a function reference. But the primary difference between it and the RxJS version is that it uses abort controller instead of subscription, because abort controller already exists in the DOM, and it's pretty much the same thing as a subscription, and it can also use abort signal to abort via like a for each type of subscription. So, which also exists in RxJS, but doesn't take abort signal yet. So that's the overall proposal.
So it's interesting that we've got two specs here, like the observables thing and the also the abort signal, and these are two things that kind of started out life bouncing around TC39,
right?
But the decision has been made to sort of do them in the DOM instead, which I think it's an interesting pair that way.
Yeah, it is. I think that there's a variety of reasons for that. It seems like there's, well, I mean, if you look at the DOM like a giant library, as opposed to like a language spec, it's able to move a bit more quickly than, say, TC39 would, right? Because TC39 has to be a bit more careful because everything they do is all encompassing, where the DOM, whatever the DOM does probably isn't going to affect Node at all. It might affect decisions that Node makes, but not anything directly, right?
Yeah, that was my worry for a long time as well, of like, oh, if we don't get this into the JavaScript spec, then Node can't make use of it. But then someone pointed out, it's like, well, set timeout isn't in TC39. You know, I know the Node folks are looking at the WHATWG stream spec as something that they, oh yeah, we could adopt that, even though it's not TC39.
Right.
And the URL spec as well, like that's in there now as well for Node. So it's not really a blocker for getting things into Node.js.
Right. I think that well, there's a TC39 proposal for Observable as well, and the TC39 proposal for Observable is stalled for quite some time. And I think the concern of a lot of people is that, you know, it doesn't really require any syntax changes. So does it really belong in JavaScript? My concern about it not landing there also is that what we'll end up with is a thing like we have with EventTarget now, where there's add event listener, remove event listener in one spot, and then you go over to another environment, and it's just add listener, remove listener, and you go somewhere else, and it's on and off. But they all do the same thing. And ideally, those APIs would have been uniform, because then other libraries like RxJS or whoever, or you know, various frameworks and whatever can say, oh, well, if this has add event listener, then I can assume that it's this type of thing, and they don't have to test for 3 different flavors of the same API.
And so I'm just thinking kind of out loud here, so this is probably nonsense, but I wonder if there's some way we could fix that by if a much smaller spec defined an abstraction of EventTarget, which was sort of the common parts between Node and the web. Like maybe it would only have the observables and not have add event listener or something like that, and that would become something that both could use, and that would sort. You wouldn't need things like bubbling and capturing that could remain in the website.
Right.
And that could become the common part to kind of, because I agree that it's a problem that, yeah, the EventTarget, event emitter got that sort of difference that would be nice to solve.
Right. Yeah. It'd be nice to solve, just to have that common API. I think the other side of it too is people were like, well, Promise has all of these syntactic things that they've added to JavaScript, which is why Promise belongs. But if everyone remembers, Promise didn't have those things whenever they were added to
it was the plan
JavaScript.
from the start, though. Like as soon as Promise thing started, like the end goal was like async await or some syntactical way. So I guess we don't have that yet for observables. We certainly didn't have that for abort signal and abort controller.
Right. I think, well, Jafar Hussain had a proposal that he withdrew that was a for on loop, I think it was. Yeah. So basically it was for on and it would accept observable instead. I personally think that Observable should just probably implement async iterator, and then it would work just like any other async iterable. The problem there is technically Observable has no back pressure control, so you could end up building up a buffer, but odds are pretty low that would happen. People just need to understand that that's a possibility, I suppose. But yeah,
you get a microtask problem, I guess, because it would be promise based then, so you'd be on a microtask, and in particular cases that might be a problem. But
yeah. So it's well, I think the other problem too is you could have inside of that for await loop, you can have multiple other awaits. And if one of those takes a long time, then the buffer for whatever's coming in on that observable piles up, and you end up with, you know, memory bloat. So there's that kind of problem.
No, that's a really tough thing to, I think, for the average programmer to know that could happen. You know, saying like, it seems like a foot gun. Like I personally don't think that that's a great idea. I mean, like, I think I'm seeing in practice that I'm afraid that people would do it and not realize the potential implications of doing so.
With streams, I generally recommend pull streams over push streams. Like my approach to it, I don't know this is separate to observables, but it's, yeah, create a pull stream if you can, and only create a push stream if you can't, you know.
Sure.
So something like a WebSocket has to be a push stream because you're going to get those events regardless. Or like if you're turning a series of mouse events into a stream of sorts, that has to be push. I don't see how you could solve that unless you make it smart enough so it knows that particular kinds of events can override other events, which is what we do at the platform level, but I guess we could do it further down. Because you could say if you get 100 mouse events, 100 mouse move events, you're only really interested in the last one.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically any DOM event is going to be push. Any you know, whether it's WebSockets or whatever, animation is going to be push. But pretty much when you're on the front end, I'd say some huge percentage of events are push based. When you're in the middle layer, like Node or something like that, generally back pressure is more of a concern there because you're communicating usually two directions. And in that case, you know, observable isn't always the best choice. It's why RxJava has a flowable type. So which is basically an observable where you prime it by saying, I want this many values, and then it pushes that many values at you as quick as it can. And then you say, now I want this many values, and it does it again, you know, trying to optimize for back pressure control and performance, because just raw push is always going to be a bit faster than having to request each value every single time. But yeah, I think for the front end, at least for the DOM side of it, it does make more sense than it does maybe in Node. It just, I don't know. It depends on the use case, I suppose.
What's the word on the street? Oh, Jake?
No, I was just going to say, I agree. I think the one case you really encounter the need for flow control on the front end is network. So, and disk operations, which there are only a few right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Hey Ben, what's the current word on the street now that you have the WHATWG proposal? As far as TC39 is concerned, like, are they like good, go that direction, or are they like, no, don't do that, we want to handle it?
Well, the TC39 had pushed back on the observable proposal and said, well, let's see if there's any vendor interest in observable. So the WHATWG work is almost directly dictated by an ask of the TC39, which was, you know, let's see who's interested in this as far as vendors go, and then maybe we'll talk about it. So I don't think it's straight up dead, at least in the TC39, but I do think it's kind of waiting to see what happens with the WHATWG proposal. So
what's the general feeling from browser vendors right now on the WHATWG proposal?
Well, my Chrome's all in.
Chrome's all in. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so Chrome's all in. We're trying to line up. Well, we've lined up work to get it implemented behind a feature flag, but you know, that there's still we still are looking to see what any feedback is from any of the other browser vendors. So, and that's been slow. Part of it might just be because the issue landed just before Christmas break.
Oh, yeah, right.
So, you know, it might have
gotta launch at the right time, Ben. Can't just like put it out there.
I know, but I'm excited.
Yeah, so on the Chrome team, we don't really see observables, promises, and streams competing with each other. Like they're you know, useful for different things. The streams, the WHATWG stream stuff is for streams where back pressure is important, where buffering is very important, and whereas and that makes it not useful for event target style stuff. So we're happy for observables to be that thing.
Right, and the WHATWG observable proposal actually uses promises, and so does the TC39 observable proposal. People kind of forget that, and a lot of it is so it can support that async await syntax that people like.
So what can people do to get, if they want this in their like how do they rally the vendors, or even TC39, like getting the observable proposal going? Just in general, if you care about a proposal, how do you get more involved?
I mean, you can go in thumbs up issues, right? That's one thing, or try to get attention to it via Twitter posts and things like that.
What about Jay? What are your thoughts?
I think, yeah, I agree. I think one of the most impactful things is just, buzz and having a clear signal to the people deciding whether some people actually want something or not. Like if you disagree with a particular proposal, those people are usually the loudest and make the most noise and cause proposals to stall, for good or for bad. Like that may be a good thing. And the opposite's true. If you really like a proposal, you should
be a squeaky wheel.
Yeah. Let it known that it's very useful. But if you want to get actually directly involved, like Ben was saying, you can actually comment on the issue tickets, like on the WHATWG proposal tickets, and then in TC39 they have separate repos, so you can just make a new issue ticket in a particular proposal that you want to comment about.
So it turns out the lights in this room go off if I don't move enough, and I'm trying to
trying to dance.
But I did have a point to raise. So before I go and figure out how the lights come back on, and this room is full of camera equipment as well.
This is dark mode, or
this is going to be a ghost story from the history of web.
It's like you're conjuring something. It's really great.
It's great.
So a kind of war story from service workers with this is that there was a lot of hype around service worker as far as the Safari folks could see, but what they couldn't see was people coming with solid use cases. There was a lot of people going like, we want this is great, this is what we want to use it, but what they were saying back to us is like, well, but what are they going to use it for? This just seems like a lot of hype that's been drummed up by DevRel. And on one hand I was like, oh, thank you, I did a thing, but also okay, we so yeah, my advice would be, tweet at people, implementers and browsers, comment on issues, but make sure you're saying, this is what I need this for, or this is how this makes my life so much easier for this case. And that's what we did in the end. We had so big and small companies go and say that we want to use it to make this user experience better, and we can't do it without it.
Cool.
I'm going to try and turn these lights on. Just talk among yourselves. I'll pick up whatever's happening.
Well, so Ben,
yeah.
I heard there's a big interest in the BigInt proposal.
That's pretty good.
Oh, you got it.
That's pretty good.
Wah.
Yeah, I just told my big interest joke.
Yeah. Big integer.
Oh, it was good.
That's so funny. I'm so funny. I learned from you all. I learned from Ben and Jay. But anyway, so Jay, I know you're really excited about this stuff. Do you want to give us a quick overview of what this is?
Sure. Yeah. Like I think it's one of those things where it's like if you've run into this problem before, you'll be really excited about it. If you haven't, then you'll be like, why would anyone want this? So, but it's BigInt. It's called BigInt, as in big integer, and it's just the ability for you to have arbitrary precision numbers, integers in JavaScript, and that includes 64-bit integers, which is the most important for me. And so the reason why I'm excited about it is just because at Netflix, which is where I previously worked, I ran into this all the time, because I worked a lot on certain internal tooling and logging infrastructure, and people we've got a lot of different languages. We've got people who are writing Java stuff, people writing Node stuff, and the Java people don't know that JavaScript can't handle 64-bit integers, and so it will send stringified JSON with 64-bit integers to JavaScript, and JavaScript's like, hey, JSON parse, cool, and then it loses its precision. Now, the unfortunate thing about this proposal is currently it does not solve that particular problem. Because, and the reason behind that is because they currently believe that they have to have a special syntax for these big ints. Like they're not going to basically just make number all of a sudden have arbitrary precision. Instead, you have to, like if you're doing like a big int literal, you'd have like the number and then the letter n. It's like a suffix at the end of it. And the reason for that is complicated, but the quick gist of it is that they're afraid of that if they all of a sudden have high, arbitrary precision, that code that ironically behaves like code that currently relies on the incorrect, imprecise math, like if you rely on the fact that the numbers overflow in some way, you could have problems, right? If all of a sudden it actually starts computing the correct and precise value. I'm skeptical because I haven't yet to see anyone provide actual in practice examples where, like, there's been some examples where people found contrived examples out in the wild. They're contrived, but they're out in the wild. But they're all, the ones I've seen at least so far, have been cases of like no one's going to care that doesn't work anymore. They're not like production websites that anyone cares about. They're old things that are no longer maintained, or they search to GitHub for code bases that are many years old. And at the end of the day, it does suck. I do understand the huge burden they have, right? Because they do have to not break the web. And I know there's been cases where they have broken the web, quote unquote, in minor cases, like broken a very small subset of people that probably didn't care and probably didn't even notice that they broke them. And me personally, I'm on that side. I think that they could probably figure out a way to make it so that the bare minimum break, but no one really actually notices, and then everyone else gets the benefits, because having the special syntax for it is it's obviously not intuitive, but it also just causes addition. It doesn't solve some of the fundamental problems that I've had with needing like 64-bit integers in JavaScript. So that's the quick gist of it.
My curiosity is how many APIs will update to accept them along with number. For example, RxJS has an issue where you can make an observable timer and you can give it a date. And what it does internally is it takes that date and it figures out the number of milliseconds from whenever you subscribe to whenever that date is, and it does a set timeout and it waits that long. However, if the date's far enough in the future, then the number of milliseconds is too big.
Right.
So a big int would solve that problem. Right now, it's just an open issue on RxJS because it's a very rare edge case that anyone hits it. But the current solution would be to, okay, I'll just schedule an interval for some divided amount of time and take the last one, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's not.
Yeah, you're right though. It's tough that because now APIs will have to not have to, but if they want to use big ints, they have to know that it's a big int. They have to check for it.
So what are the breakages then? In what ways does it behave differently that could catch existing libraries out?
Well, there's certain ways of if you added the maximum number in JavaScript +1 and then try and check if that equals the maximum number, it actually ends up equaling the exact, they say true, even though they shouldn't say true currently. And if all of a sudden numbers had infinite precision, then that would equal false. And the concern is that there is actual code relying on that or some variation of that behavior.
But I mean, that's an edge case. So I guess most libraries that take a number today could take a big int and the world won't break. Is that
only they have to know that it's an int though, because you can't combine ints and numbers. You can't say big int times 1 or times anything. It actually throws an exception, and there's various reasons for that. I think the primary reason is that there's certain cases where you'll lose precision, and they don't want to. They'd rather, at least for at the beginning, just have it errors if you do that, because if we can't guarantee we're going to give you the right answer, we're just never going to give you an answer. And I agree with that if they're going to go down the route of having 2 separate types. But it's tough. it's a really hard problem because JavaScript needs to be very approachable and things just need to work. And a lot of the people, especially if you've been doing JavaScript and JavaScript's your only language, you probably haven't had to experience, like the distinctions between number types. Like what's the difference between a number and an int, to a JavaScript programmer.
They're only 0.3000004% different.
Oh, but I'm excited about it just for the fact that it's being talked about and hoping that this will lead to some additional extensions to the JSON specification to perhaps support them in some way so that we can now have, serializable 64-bit integers within JSON. The problem with the JSON spec is, ironically, the JSON spec does not dictate certain number precision. Like, it actually just talks about syntax. It doesn't say it has to be a double, or it can be a 64-bit integer.
Brendan Ike has been talking about a proposal recently. I don't remember what it's called, but it's the same thing that you see in like C#, where basically you can suffix a number with like L and it becomes a long or whatever. Like I don't think long was part of it, but
yeah, it actually, that proposal morphed into this one.
Oh, it did.
Yeah, and so that proposal got the ball rolling, and then it morphed into this. But I know that they, at the bottom of the proposal, if I remember correctly, this current one, they talked about that and talked about the possibility that they might in the future still do something like that, because that was basically solving just the 64-bit integer use case, but not solving the arbitrary precision use case. And so they're like, well, what if we can just give you arbitrary precision, which includes 64-bit integers? So, at least as a first step, because there's also methods on the BigInt that let you basically say, as a unsigned 64-bit integer or whatever. And the browser vendors have said, like V8 people have said, that when you use that, they'll be able to know that that is going to be a 64-bit integer, even though it's still a BigInt. You're basically kind of implying that it should be a 64-bit integer, and they'll be able to optimize it better than you could with the arbitrary infinite precision. But then potentially you could, if you use that in some other case, there may be some sort of like de-optimization or something like that. I don't know how they're actually going to implement it. But then, have you run into that before, like the 64-bit integer stuff with numbers? I know when you worked at Netflix on UI platform, did you guys ever?
I don't think that any of the information. No, I take it back. Yeah, we did. We did run into situations where we were getting back like time in nanoseconds from stuff that was coming back with and we're having precision issues because of that.
Yeah, ironically, we have account ID was a really popular one. Account ID was passed around as a 64-bit integer.
Yeah. Jake, you sold, or you're? How do you feel about this? Do we have?
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in Jake's.
Yes.
Well, you're going to be disappointed because I don't have a I don't have a hot take on this. It's, I guess, the kind of places I've worked, it's not something I've run into. I mean, I understand the problems and it all seems fine. The problems you speak about are valid. I think a cautious approach sounds okay. It does present a problem for the JSON spec. Well, the JSON specs had a problem, and this highlights it. I guess developers in the meantime could, like, instead of sending that data as a number, send it as a string, and then like have a pre-post processor go through. And I assume there's some parse as BigInt method in the same way that we have methods that turn strings into numbers. I'm assuming there's one to turn into a BigInt.
Yes, yeah. The BigInt constructor and all that stuff work the same as number does. Like, you can pass a string into it and it will just convert it to a BigInt and stuff. Yeah,
it seems like at scale though, where it's painful to migrate to, right? Like, if they do decide to go with it, then you would literally have to wait till pretty much everybody had it implemented to start using it. Because I can't think of a great way to polyfill something like that.
You can. It just would be really poor performance. Because there are BigInt libraries already for JavaScript, and it just basically takes,
Right, but I mean, if they're doing it with something where you're actually suffixing the
Right. Then it would have to be the compiler would have to, your Babel or whatever you have would have to do a bunch of awful things. But you're right. Yeah. But for us, it would be, if we could somehow start using it in JSON, we'd be able to use it fairly early, just because Node, it moves fairly quickly. We don't have to wait for all the browsers. It just wait for Node. But yeah, the big concern with the use cases I've seen around cases where they have 64-bit integers passing around through JSON or what have you, it's at really high scale, like hundreds of thousands of requests per second. And there's always been concerns that doing the stringification and the deserialization costs too much in CPU and garbage collection. Ironically, in practice, I actually had some services convert over and they didn't actually see even a notable change, even though theoretically it makes sense that a 64-bit integer is going to take less room in memory than a string. In practice, for whatever reason, it didn't. It was not a discernible difference even at scale. So interesting, but I'm sure there are cases where that is a problem. I can guarantee that. But.
So, Jake, what exciting proposals are you just freaked out about right now, and you need everybody to jump on the Kool-Aid wagon?
Oh, okay. So there's not what I'm working on personally, but one I'm excited about because it's taken a long time is structured cloning. So we've had this concept on the web for ages. The idea of structured cloning. It's two operations. It's a serialization and a deserialization, and it's what is used to store objects in IndexedDB.
And is this going to be in TC39 or is this in WHATWG?
This is on WHATWG.
Got it.
So it might have even started out life somewhere else, but it's what we use to send objects over post message and store it in IndexedDB, send it to other places or whatever. But it's kind of useful on its own because we see a lot of developers right now, if they're wanting to clone an object, deep clone an object, one of the easiest ways to do it is to convert it into JSON and then convert it back into an object. And that's kind of, it's pretty fast. We've optimized for that case, but it's a horrible hack. And there's also a lot of cases where it doesn't work. It doesn't work for dates. Doesn't work for BigInts, which, as you can tell, I'm really excited about and know lots about. But structured cloning will work for that, and it works for objects with circular references. It can clone those. So as I say, that's been in the browsers for ages. The bit that was missing, which was a violation of the extensible web, was a method to just do it. Like right now, if you want to structure clone something, you either create a message channel and send the object through one message port and out the other, and there you've got a clone. But that's async, and it shouldn't be async. You could do it synchronously using the history API, but that's a horrible hack as well because you're doing replace state just in order to clone an object, and that's slow for other reasons because of all the interaction with the navigation spec. So just purely as it's like, why didn't we have this years ago? A method, structure clone, that takes your object and it returns you a deep copy of that back, as long as it's using the types that structure clone can deal with, which is all of the primitive types, but then also like date objects, blobs, files, array buffers, that sort of thing.
So so it'll accept arbitrary objects. What happens if you have an object like a user-defined class? I've got like my sweet class or whatever it is.
I believe it. Or off the top of my head, I'm not sure. It'll either throw, because it's a kind that it can't convert, or it will do so it's similar to what other things do, and it just treats it as a basic object. So this is something we were chatting about actually earlier today in the office. Because it would be nice to take the structure cloning idea and give it to TC39, because it feels like a basic version of it should really sit there. And then the WHATWG should be able to extend it with types that only it knows about, so things like blobs and files. And I think that's what this has been blocked on all this time, is kind of figuring out the most pure way of doing that.
Has there been any consideration to using like a symbol as though people have used symbol iterator or even symbol observable to say, if I have an object and it has symbol dot clone me or whatever you want to call it, then call that function and it will return a cloned copy of me, and then we can use that.
Yeah. And that would be great for cloning. What it wouldn't be good for is serializing.
How do you deserialize that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, serializing it is fine, but as you say, deserializing is when the problem happens. You would need a kind of, and this is something that maybe we'll get, is a kind of registry where you say, here is a named symbol, like a non-unique symbol or something, and when you encounter a serialized thing that is associated with the symbol type, come back to me, and I'll convert that into an object for you from some kind of binary type or string or something. But that's not what the first iteration is. It's just deep clone an object. So I think it's something people who are dealing with kind of a mutable state might be interested in, because there's a lot of hacks and stuff to deal with. I want this object essentially copied so I can modify one part of it. So I guess that's not truly immutable because you are still mutating it, but at least you're not having objects shared between sort of individual sort of points in time. So yeah, it should help a lot with that sort of stuff.
Is there the IndexedDB API for me has just been like, every time I try to use it, I'm like, whoa. Like, is there been any talk about somehow simplifying that, or is the expectation that you probably use a library on top of that?
Well, so I maintain our library, which just does the IndexedDB API pretty much as it is, except it uses promises where IDB should have used promises. And it's been on something I've been promising to do for years now, is to kind of write a big IndexedDB article. And usually when I write tech articles, I want to just go straight to the lowest level. I don't want to use libraries, but I wouldn't do that with IndexedDB, because as you say, it's impossible to use. We came up with a proposal to add promises in. It didn't. The other browsers weren't as keen on it, and it's probably fair because it was quite hacky, sort of mixing together. The two APIs. It was quite messy. We might end up with for a transaction. One of the ideas that we've been throwing around is right now when you create a transaction object, you've got that, and that's where all your callbacks start happening. We thought about this maybe just an extra method we could add, that instead of you create a transaction, you get an object back, is you create a transaction and you also pass in a promise or a function. Actually, it'd be a function that gives you the API in there. And if that function's async, your transaction will last as long as that async function, like until the return promise resolves. And that's a kind of hook in that we can start like giving you different APIs. Like here's an object store, but without the crap. Like here's all the lights have gone again. Excellent. So like here's a way of getting an index, but once again, without creating request objects, it will it will return promises. It's just an extra way to sort of sneak in a decent API. I'm all for it, but it's sort of early days with that stuff.
Sure, that's cool.
I think we have time to talk about dark theme again.
Yeah, I'll go deal with that and pick up the conversation again.
Yeah, cool. I think
Google's really big on their energy conservation.
Yeah. I'm surprised you're
in this room, but I'm sitting by a window.
Yeah. Well, we have time to cover one more exciting, whatever it is. So, does anybody just have a burning desire that they need to tell the internet about?
Pipeline
something?
operator.
Pipeline.
Yeah, pipeline
but
operator.
Is there a song to go with the pipeline operator? Like,
no, but I'll gladly sing a song if the TC39 pushes it on.
Okay. What about like ooh operator? There's a song there.
Smooth operator.
Smooth
They could call it the smooth operator. It is pretty smooth.
Yeah.
So
operator. No.
I'm gonna take a guess because this is something I've been thinking about recently. I think RX dealt with this has been dealing with this. Is there's the problem of like if you've got something like an observable, which if you want loads of methods on it, it can get big, right? It can get big in terms of size. It doesn't really fit with the sort of import model that we have now. It can't be tree shaken methods on a class. So I think RX has been, you can now sort of import individual methods, but then you've got that sort of function wrapping problem, or you're passing in the instance, and it's the pipeline operator that sort of solves that, right?
Yeah. So the overall thing is people want to be able to take things like arrays or observables or various other classes that you can have tons and tons of methods for, and they want to be able to create these functions and chain them in a left to right manner. And in order to do that, they have to decorate the prototype, which is gross for a lot of reasons. Reason number one, you could be trampling, if you add a zip operation to array, let's say, you could be trampling somebody else's zip operation that they added with something slightly different. Or reason number two, you add a zip operation to array or a map operation to observable, and then you have a library and somebody else is consuming your library, and they start to depend on your zip method or your map method or something like that. And then you remove it and you break them, and there's no way to know that you broke them. So those are just a couple of problems. And then on top of which those things can't be tree shaken and yada, yada, yada. So we need some sort of means to allow people to add kind of arbitrary methods to classes and chain things in a left to right way. And originally we had the bind operator proposal, which was the : syntax. And that basically took the left-hand side of that operation and passed it to the right-hand side of the operation as this. But it also did some other things, and all the bike shedding around the other things kind of killed that proposal. And like how you would restrict it to certain classes, and yet like people wanted to do stuff like that, like almost like a C# extension method sort of thing. But the bind operator is much simpler in that it's more of a functional programming mechanism where what you have is the left-hand side of the operation.
Ben, you said bind.
I'm sorry. The pipeline, the pipeline operator. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
The pipeline operator is different in that you take the left-hand side of the operation and you pass it as the first argument to the function on the right-hand side of the operation. And it's by itself, it's incredibly powerful. And there are mechanisms you can do this with, say, Ramda or RxJS has a pipe function that you can do this, but it's not quite as ergonomic. It's not quite as clean. And it's not quite as easy to read to do that. But I think the current hangups about it are people think that it should also be coupled with some sort of I forget what they call it, like the targeted arguments from one side or the other, or trying to pass multiple arguments to the right-hand side via different currying mechanisms and whatever. Like people want to associate it with these other things. And I personally don't think they should. I think it should. It's a great proposal. It stands on its own. It's very, very powerful. People will find great uses for it, and those other things can be proposed separately. But that's just me. But I think that it solves the problem of, things like what Lodash is trying to do or RxJS is trying to do, where it would be great if we could add all of these methods to something, but realistically, it's not a great way to do things because of the way the web works, and we don't want to have to ship all of those methods to the browser. We want to be able to tree shake those things down and get things as lean as possible. Maybe only pull in methods when you need them. If you're like, you could lazy load methods in and use them, that sort of thing.
What I love about this podcast and talking about the different proposals and things like that is you can literally go on for like an hour on each proposal, right? I mean, we were only able to talk about 4, but maybe some last thoughts about the pipeline operator from Jake and Jay.
For me, well, maybe not obviously, but I'm a big RxJS person as well. So I want it. I'm blinded by that. Like that makes me very biased. I won't probably listen to anyone's arguments because I really just want it for RxJS. It just would make my life so much easier.
What about you, Jake? Sold?
Yeah, absolutely sold. It's yeah, I've been facing the same problem in other libraries. Like, I've got this class, I want to add this method because it's useful, but it's not useful to everyone. But by adding it, it's going to increase the size of the library by that amount. Whereas with the pipeline operator, I just provide it as a function, and the ergonomics remain nice, and you still get tree shaking and all that sort of stuff. Tick, ship it.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention all the clever functional programming things you can do and clean your code up when you have tools like that. It's I'm a big fan of that.
Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason why it's being held up is like they want the ability to like provide a different argument order. I think that was the things that were holding people up.
That's precisely. They want to try to couple it to something related to that. Yeah. And honestly, that could be separate functionality. Like, but they wanted the ability to say like, oh, I don't want to pass it as just the first. I want to be able to say, no, passes the second argument to the next function and default the first argument to something else. They have something for that. It's called a higher order function. I think it's probably a fine solution for that in the short term, and I wouldn't delay something as powerful as a pipeline operator on that personally, but
so
I'm not on TC39. So
Gilbert has been championing this, it looks like, or at least just looking on the Git commits, and looks like it's actually been a while. This is almost as old as the.
We've got a Googler, Little Dan. Little Dan is the.
I saw Little Dan too. Yeah, it seems like he's also on the structure cloning one. But I mean, 2015. So is it being stalled right now, or is it like picking up steam again?
It's originally there was the bind operator. The bind operator was kind of taking the forefront, and people were kind of ignoring the pipeline operator because they thought, well, we don't need two things like this. But the bind operator stalled in a horrible quagmire because there was lots of bike shedding around how to get it restricted to certain classes, and then people kind of pulled back from it. So that now the pipeline operator is more to the forefront. I like the pipeline operator over the bind operator just because it's a simpler concept. It's honest to God, if someone gave me the choice between observables in JavaScript and the pipeline operator in JavaScript, I think the right thing to do would be put pipeline operator not in JavaScript. That's not how things work, thank God. But if it was, if I had to pick a favorite, I would pick the pipeline operator. I have an observable library. We can use that, but the pipeline operator is very powerful, and the only way to get it into JavaScript is to get it through to TC39.
It seems like also if you just want to, it's kind of cool because like if you look at TC39 and the different observables, you could just do simple things like if you care about a specific proposal, then you can just edit the wiki or something like that, or edit the README and just like put your example in it or something. Like there's a lot of really cool ways you could just. Or do people just say, no, you cannot submit a PR?
No, you can. You absolutely can. Yeah, whether the proposal maintainer will actually merge to the PR is a different story. But
right.
as a general rule in GitHub, if someone's got a public repository, you can submit a PR. No one's going to stop you.
I wish people would submit PRs to make my sites more pretty. I really do. Like that J-face fruit snack thing. Yeah. Jake, I made a website that fed J fruit snacks.
I don't know what a J fruit snack is. Is that what?
No,
what is
well,
that?
fruit snack.
Fruit snack.
Oh, I see. Oh, I heard J fruit, like J fruit snack, and I was like, that sounds amazing. I want one. Okay. Can we market this now? We'll design the packaging next time. I think this is it. We all quit our jobs in the web. We're gonna make J fruit snacks.
J fruit. I wonder what a J fruit would be. Oh, it's so handsome and bearded.
I think there is actually. Isn't there something called J fruit snacks?
I don't know.
I feel like there is now, but I could be wrong.
There is now. Whatever the hairy fruit is.
All I know is if you need Jay Phelps for anything, all you have to do is just call and tell him that you've got an endless supply of fruit snacks, and he'll show.
I will. It's true.
It's true. This is an IRL thing. So, anyway, so any last thoughts?
If we're going to talk about like just general JavaScript wish lists, I really want the do operator. I want do, and I want async do, and I want it yesterday.
Is that why you changed tap, Ben, in RxJS?
No, so in moving to functional operators, I had to change from do to tap because do is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. So switch, I had to rename to switch all for the same reason. Catch had to be catch error for the same reason. So,
Jake, what else is on your wish list?
Well, I'll take those two first. What else? I made a little list. What am I looking at? I would love us to take a look. It's a little bit related to the IndexedDB thing. Like as a higher level thing, let's take IndexedDB and let's go in both directions. I want async local storage because that's what most people just want, and we could have a nice API for it. You don't have to do all of IndexedDB, but let's also go the other way and create a byte storage. So just a way to store bytes, like indexed by some kind of name. So, you know, even less complicated than a file system, but you could build a file system on top of it. You could build IndexedDB on top of it. You could build WebSQL on top of it. So IndexedDB is kind of sitting in this odd middle ground that it's too high level and not like a high level enough for two really good use cases.
Mm-hmm.
What about Jay? What are like your top two?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the things we've been talking about today, honestly, these are the proposals that I really, really am interested in, the top ones. Obviously, I'm interested in WebAssembly. It's not JavaScript, but it's related to the web in general. So all the WebAssembly stuff is I'm obsessed with. So I'm happy that that's making a lot of progress. They've been really phenomenal at doing incremental approaches. Instead of one giant, huge proposals, they've been doing lots of smaller ones because they can move faster.
Cool, and we all know what Ben wants. Ben wants the WHATWG EventTarget observable proposal, observables, TC39 observables, and you also want pipeline operator. So
yeah.
Big wish list. Have you been good?
No.
Santa's not coming for a while.
That's true.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for listening. Again, you can follow Ben at Ben Lesh on Twitter, myself, Tracy at Lady Leet on Twitter, Jake at Jaffa the Cake, Jay at _Jay Phelps. And if you go to, this is so terrible every time I say this, but if you go to this.co/JavaScript, we actually have really amazing like state of JavaScript type events where we get browser vendors and core contributors to different frameworks and libraries coming and talking about the latest happenings in JavaScript. So that happens like every other month or so. We're going to be doing state of WebAssembly soon with Jay. Jay, you hate that, don't you? Like, how do you spell that? This.co.
Oh yeah, it's hard.
THISDOT.co.
So terrible. Isn't it terrible, Jake? I thought I was going to be clever. I was like, yeah, this is the best name ever.
I thought about 3 different ways that URL could be just from hearing it like exactly. This. Which dot is a dot and which one's dot?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I used to work for an agency called The Team, and look, it's the same problem, right?
Yeah.
We're just waiting for that the upper level domain name of dot, just DOT, so that way you can have dot.
I want it. Okay, everyone. Well, you can also follow Modern Web on Twitter at modern.web. Oh my gosh, even worse, modern DOT web. Other than that, we will see you on another episode. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye, everyone.